All right, so we're going to start talking about January 1791 to April 1792 now. Uh, Lo and behold, the National Assembly approves of the war against the foreign powers. And like the heading says, the war actually goes surprisingly well. It's kind of one of those strange sort of things that sometimes when violence begins, it catches fire to such a degree that the violent impulse kind of takes over, and the French felt like they had something to fight for. And sometimes when you got aggression in your bones and something to fight for, you can turn the tide of a war, especially even a war that isn't supposed to go especially well for you. The war against the foreign powers, at least early on, went surprisingly well. It takes a turn later on, but initially the Girondins seem to kind of be justified in their desire to go to war as a unifying tactic. Now it says Girondins and the king. Now we have sort of a problem. The Girondins, the king has kind of allied himself with the Girondins in his support of the war. And the Girondins, to some degree, they're sort of moderate. They're kind of, they're not, the Jacobins. And when we talk about the political parties, or, I'll make a slide, or I'll make a video for the political parties. The Girondins are kind of shaded more towards the moderate, sort of conservative side. And the king is kind of become ancillary. He's kind of become, somebody that nobody knows quite what to do with, and nobody really wants to have around. Eventually, you kind of know how it all turns out. But the Girondins sort of want to resolve this thing with the king by not killing him, but by either, making him kind of a non-speaking member of the government, or just exiling him and getting rid of him, or whatever. So the Girondins are in full debate about what to do with the king, but they don't want to kill him, which later becomes a bigger issue. And the king was sort of supportive of the Girondins' idea to go to war, even though it was probably selfish. On the surface, he kind of supported them early on. Now we get to Robespierre. Robespierre opposes the war. Robespierre is a Jacobin. He's kind of a left, very liberal, kind of radical sort of guy. And he's kind of on the outs at this point, as the war is going pretty well. He voiced an opposition to the war initially, and he never really supports the foreign war, at least early on. So that kind of puts him on the political outs, which is kind of a strange position for him to be in, since he assumes so much power later on. But initially he was vocally against the war, and he was kind of, an outsider kind of looking in. Things change eventually. Let's go to April to August 1792. The Brunswick Manifesto was a manifesto, or was a threat by a general, Brunswick. And he basically said, similar to the Declaration of the Pilnet, if anybody lays a hand on the king, or anybody causes harm to the royal family in Paris, he's going to level the whole city when he gets there. And this is at a point when Austria and Prussia are doing pretty well against the French in the war. The tides of the war have turned, and the Austrians and the Prussians are doing pretty well. And this foreign general threatens the city of Paris, and basically says that, if anything happens to these non-juring priests, or anything happens to the king and the royal family, that he's going to, lay waste to Paris, essentially. And really all that does is it intensifies the desire to hurt anybody who is affiliated with the moderate or the conservative branch of the government. So that's when Marat, and I'll talk about him in class. I'll tell you some stories about Marat. That's when he intensifies his rhetoric. He basically takes the Brunswick Manifesto and uses it as an opportunity to get the mob, the sans-culottes and these other guys, to go out and start killing anyone who is not, allied with the real left wing of the revolution. So anybody who's not a Jacobin and anybody who has any sympathy for the nobility or the monarchy is under threat by Marat, and especially non-juring priests who did not sign the civil constitution of the clergy. The other thing he does is he basically says to the sans-culottes and the other mob that we need to kill all political prisoners who are in the prisons of Paris, because he's really afraid that if Brunswick gets to Paris, opens the jails to political prisoners, folks who had sympathized with the king or the nobility, that they'll point the finger at the liberals who are running the National Assembly at this point. And so he says, we got to kill these folks in order to silence them. And we also have to kill them in order that they won't help Brunswick if he ever gets to Paris. So this is when things get really nasty and start to get really bloody in Paris. This is when people get super paranoid that the foreign powers are going to restore the king. This is when people get super paranoid of the political prisoners who are sitting in the prisons coming out and pointing the finger at them. And Marat just kind of stirs things up even worse by, saying to the mob that we need to go kill these non-juring priests, these political prisoners, and these people who have sympathies towards the moderate kind of in conservative ways that France used to be. So that's all I'm going to do on this one. So I'm going to stop that now.